about the time when people need the water as well. So in terms of the numbers, 0 is bad, no oxygen. 10 is a good number, just for some ballpark values. And the units aren't so important because these numbers hold. Okay, so no oxygen equals death. That's pretty simple, as it does for us. Often, though, fish will try and move somewhere else where there's more oxygen, even if that means leaping out of the water. They'll generally try and find somewhere else. So it's more a question of the low oxygen levels. At low oxygen levels, before death, the fish will stop feeding. If they're not feeding, they're not growing, and they go to the surface to try and get enough oxygen where they're more vulnerable to predation. The question then is, how low is low? And being a scientist, the answer is it depends. But different fish have different tolerances to low oxygen. For example, the common smelts, concentrations less than 3, they're not going to survive very long compared to an eel that can survive concentrations as low as 1 part per million. And just in pictures, so that gradient from the more tolerant, the eels, to the less tolerant, like the trout. Your wild goldfish are pretty tolerant, that's why we keep them in tanks. And there's quite a few natives in between here, Inunga and Belize and things like that. But an important question is, where is oxygen a problem? It's not a problem everywhere. In the steep mountain streams, even when the flow gets low, the water's still tumbling over rocks and boulders, getting plenty of reaeration. Oxygen's not really a critical issue in those streams. It can be a problem in these lowland streams. It sounds like you saw yesterday, the oxygen can be depleted by too much respiration, by weed and bacteria, and especially if there's not enough reaeration, not enough water oxygen being mixed into the water by flow, by the movement of the water. So putting that risk on a map, this is a map of the Heretaunga Plains, the red lines are the ones I consider higher risk. These are low gradient streams. So with a flatter slope, they're slow moving. That means less reaeration. These are also better conditions for the growth of aquatic plants. Now, a lot of these streams don't have much shade. And with less shade, you get at high temperatures, you also get more plant growth consuming more oxygen. And when the stream flows get low, that reduces the reaeration even further. It can also, as the velocities drop, the plants kind of lift up and they can reach the surface and smother the surface and cut off that oxygen supply to some extent. Okay, so some results. This is the Awanui stream, near Pakipaki. So this plot, this is oxygen increasing on this axis, so from 0, remember I said 10 is a pretty good number. This is over the time period through the 2013 drought from November 2012, November 2013. And you can see that daily fluctuation from low oxygen at night, high oxygen during the daytime. But as the flow dropped and the plants grew, the oxygen came right down, and we had no oxygen every morning for 77 days during that 2013 drought. And this coincided with flows less than 50 litres per second. Better conditions in the Raupery stream. Again, this is same axes. This is oxygen on this axis, same scale, same time period through 2013. Now, oxygen remained above 4 parts per million for all but 5 days in the year. But the lowest oxygen coincided with the lowest flow that we had in the stream. So temperature's critical. Fish we call them cold-blooded. And we call them cold-blooded, that means their body temperature is the same as the water around them. Their metabolism depends, their metabolic rate depends on their body temperature. So as water temperature goes up, their metabolism goes up, they need more oxygen. So the warmer it is, the more oxygen they need. Problem is, the warmer it is also when the oxygen is lowest. Okay, so we need more and there's less there. So a very tight relationship between temperature and oxygen. And high water temperatures in the Awanui, especially getting up over 25. Most our fish prefer less than 20. Now, flow is not the sole determinant of how much oxygen is in the stream, but reducing the flow can reduce the oxygen in these lowland streams. Now, the technical report, there's a whole lot of modelling I went through to predict how oxygen changes with the flow, with the purpose of informing that limit setting process that the tank stakeholder group will need to go through. And that's all. Any questions?
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
At what point of the Awanui were these measurements taken?
Our monitoring site is about half a kilometre downstream from where the Pukawa joins the Awanui, which is about a half a kilometre from Pakipaki, I suppose. Downstream of Pakipaki. Yep. On, do you know TLT Road? Yep. Yeah, a few hundred metres down TLT Road.
Just follow up with some questions around flow then. By the time we get there, in the upper reaches of the Awanui, we know it's perched. But presumably in the lower reaches there is a considerable connection with groundwater, is there?
This is the Paratua Karewarewa you're thinking about?
No, the upper reaches of the Awanui, where the springs are. From that, coming down across that first valley, there's been test pits dug there that have shown the clay layers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, up in the Turamoi wetland sort of area.
Yeah.
Because there's three inputs there. The monitoring site is below the confluence with the Pukawa, we call it the Upper Awanui, and the Karewarewa. So all three come in about the same point, and a monitoring site is downstream of there. So as well as what's happening in the Upper Awanui, there's also losses and gains through the Paratua, losing section through the Paratua, and gains in the lower, gains from groundwater in the lower Karewarewa. And Pukawa was more sourced from those hills, limestone springs in the hills above the lake. I'm not sure about the Upper Awanui though. You might be able to teach me a few things there. Yeah. Does that help?
I just want to know in the lower Awanui, by the time you get down to where you're measuring it, there would be a connection with groundwater there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Moore here then.
Yeah. So it is Māori Language Week. It's Pakipaki, not Pakipaki. And
Pakipaki.
Pokawa, do you mean Pokawa as in the lake?
The stream that
is that
comes from the lake.
P-O-U? Is that spelled P-O-U in what you were saying?
Yes.
Yes, it's Po, yeah.
Po.
Yeah, okay, that aside.
Yes, Pokawa.
Pokawa and Pakipaki, short A. So what the planting they're doing at Pakipaki, do you see that as an advantage in terms of the oxygen or not?
Yes.
When you're talking about flows, is it better to make the flow go faster, you'd have it as it is, almost in straight lines, or is it better to have it in wiggles? There seems to be a contradiction there. Ideally it's wiggles, which the council don't advocate. They want to go in straight lines, so there's no flooding. So what's from the scientist's point of view?
There's a compromise there in terms of oxygen. Yeah, shallower, faster flowing is going to increase your reaeration. So probably digging those straight lines could increase oxygen, but you're then going to impact other things, like somewhere for the fish to live that have that oxygen.
Is it possible to have the artificial, what's that word you use, aeration or something, so you can give it little hurdles to jump over?
I've given that some thought. The problem is, if you create the hurdle, that backs the water up behind it. If you put in like a weir or a rock pile or something like that, you back the water up behind it. So you create especially in these low gradient streams, if you put in a half-metre rock pile, that can back the stream up half a kilometre. So you get that little bit of reaeration at that point, but you lose it upstream. I don't know what the net balance would be.
Just that Māoris are quite used to hurdles.
Gets the Bevan and gets the Graham.
My questions are actually along the same lines as Mr. Moe's. Am I correct in assuming that if you create turbulence in a stream, you will assist aeration?
Yes.
So it's quite surprising, therefore, in response to Mr. Moe's question, that nobody's come up with some sort of a mechanism that will aid aeration in a stream without impeding too greatly in the flow.
Yeah, there are. A lot of the work is done below pollution sources. So here we're talking about weed and other things consuming oxygen, but a lot of places you have oxygen problems, excuse me, below a point discharge. And in those situations, they put in various structures and actually oxygen injection to try and deal with that release, to try and process that BOD load that's getting into the water. So work's been done. I just don't have clear in my mind what any simple solutions.
Councillor
Possibly
Graham.
a question from Mr. Maxwell, but you can both. So more water in the streams over the summer clearly would help enormously. So why can't we make it easier for the farmers upstream who own dams to release water through their consents into these streams, as they used to do in the old days, to keep the Karamu, so it ends up in the Karamu, water, and run water down through the summer?
Sure. So I think you're probably referring to the way the Glazebrook operation used to work in terms of like a border type irrigation.
Not only. Clearly that's the example, historical example, but I'm referring to the fact that farming operation would be keen to assist, but is unable to because of their consent.
So, it's not that we don't want or wouldn't consider or entertain or look at pretty closely the value of that sort of operation. In fact, if the evidence, as Dr. Wilding's suggesting, supports that and there's the desire to do it, we would be silly not to move down that path. What's typically happened is that the RMA and the consenting process says, well, what do you want the water for? And if you want it for irrigation, you get enough to irrigate your crops or your trees, but you don't get any more than that. So that it sort of differentiates the purpose, if you like. If the purpose is to take it and use it for irrigating a crop, then you get enough to do that. If you want to take and use it for environmental benefits or flow releases, you're quite entitled to and able to do that. That would be a different purpose. and obviously you would need more water, and we would look at that differently. So it's not that we don't, it's just we need to be clear what the purpose is, and if the purpose is for one or the other, then we'll do that. So we would be all ears if somebody turned up and said, look, have we got a deal for you? We want to release a whole lot of water into a catchment that's under pressure and under stress to mitigate those effects.
I'm just surprised we haven't already done that.
Well, I guess it's because we don't have the scheme, we don't have the dam or the water, so it's up.
I mean, had the conversation.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
No, it hasn't been had.
Okay, any other questions? So we've been asked here, if we go to the recommendations to, oh, sorry.
Just a
Councillor
very
Dick.
quick one. In this instance where there were 77 days with zero oxygen in the morning.
Yep.
Did it pick up any oxygen during the day?
Yeah, and actually I expected, see it's coming up here, and I actually expected that the oxygen would be really high during the day and really low at night, but the daily maximum dropped as well, so it's getting down low during the day, which suggests that those plants are struggling as well to even grow.
And did that mean mortality for aquatic life in that instance?
I don't know. We didn't. I only saw 2 fish during that period. We weren't sampling the fish. There was mortality this last summer in the Karamu. Yeah, there was a fish kill there, and it has been reported in the past.
Councillor Scott.
Mr Chairman, I do wish to apologise for my rude interruption. However, for clarification, could I find out, please, did the tai whenua apply for and get granted a consent for the remaining racewater at a nominal figure?
Yes, I see Malcolm's just walked into the room, so he can help me if I get this wrong. Te tai whenua o Hiratonga do hold consent for water out of the old artificial recharge up to a limit of 5,000 litres a second, so it's got a minimum flow for environmental purposes, wetland creation, flows, those sorts of things. So they do hold a consent.
And at the time they applied for that consent, were talks held with Mr Glazebrook for using his dam for passing out water through to the Paratua?
That predates me. Malcolm, are you able to assist with that question? Come up to the table.
I think the question probably predates Mr Miller too, but did the tai whenua, when they applied for consent for the environmental flows from the fee water that was freed up from the race, for the recharge water, did they have talks with Mr Glazebrook of being able to use that water through to augment the Paratua?
It does predate me, and I don't know the answer to that. I've looked at that as a consent, and it wasn't clear to me where the water was to be used, whether it was in the more in the Narararo catchment or to be taken out. One conversation we've had was that it would augment some of the flow along the channel that was used to divert it to the groundwater augmentation site, which would have meant it stayed in the Narararo system, and almost wouldn't have been a consumptive take. But if it's to be taken out of the catchment and transferred through potentially to Glazebrook and Glazebrook's dam and then into the Paratua, that becomes consumptive in terms of water being taken out of the Narararo and out of that catchment and used elsewhere. But in terms of conversation with Mike Glazebrook, I don't know whether what was discussed.
Perhaps we need to look to the records of the Māori committee, because it certainly was discussed there. And perhaps Mr Mohi may recall
We're getting off track here a little bit on the basis that we've been asked to formally approve this report. Just a question in regard to that. The second recommendation formally approves the Karamu Catchment in-stream flows for oxygen report for publication and public release. What's the who's hanging out for this publication? Where are what's the queue made up of? Who do you see as the intended recipient?
Well, it's primarily, as Dr. Wilding pointed out, to inform the tank collaborative process.
Okay, primarily for that.
Primarily for that.
Would others have interest?
Others will invariably have interest, and we've just taken the step with all of these reports to, given they are council documents, to have the council receive them and understand them, because invariably you're going to be asked questions about these potentially.
Sure.
To receive them, understand them before we push them out the building.
So you're happy to move? Thank you, Councillor Graham. That was my next question. Councillor Bevan seconds. Wish to speak?
I think it's a very good report, and I'm really pleased with doing the intensity of this kind of work. But it seems to me at times that we're really good at understanding the problems, but not good at solving them, because sometimes it's just quite practical. And I don't mean that as a criticism necessarily, but it's a collective criticism really. Mr. Mohi and I have had conversations with the Glazebrook family, and I got from the conversation that they're really keen to try and help here. So sometimes it might just be simply sitting down with the right people and saying, how do we solve these problems? We're not good at just, and I know there's regulation and things in, but it's easy to put those barriers up in a small community such as ours. I think we can solve a lot more problems simply by just talking to the people that are involved and talking to the community rather than going back to the rule books. So thanks for your report. I think it's an excellent report and highlights the issues.
Seconder? Thank you.
No, thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, yeah, it's a very interesting report, Thomas, and thank you for it. It's really important for us to gain a better understanding of the ecosystem and how it operates and what the issues are with it, and this report adds to our knowledge. The next challenge, obviously, for you is to find some mechanism that's efficient and cost-effective to re-aerate these streams where we know we're going to have issues in the future.
Further speakers? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this report has been to tank, and it will eventually surface again when it comes into looking at some of those minimum flows. And certainly, while the news looks reasonable for the Raupari, the Awanui, which does flow through quite a lot of the land south of Havelock North, which is under irrigation, there obviously are going to be some impacts there, and it's how we sort through that through the tank process that's going to be important. I would like to say that no barriers have been put to finding solutions for alternative ways of doing this, but it didn't meet the community expectations, or, you know, to their, the barriers were put there by the community, not by the council. So I just really want to make sure that we do realise that the council has been open at all times to that, and consequently that's why the consents were granted in the first place for that environmental flow.
Thank you. Do you wish to sum up, Mover?
No, thank you, Chair.
I'll put that motion in. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Thank you, Mr. Wilding.